Hello and welcome to Real Talkin' Fiction, the podcast where storytelling meets raw, unfiltered conversations. I'm Eddie Bowers, or Edward Bowers, as some of you guys might know me from my books. I'm here to explore the stories we tell, both real and imagined. From deep dives into some of life's tougher questions to thrilling fiction that I write. So hopefully that's going to keep you guys on edge. We're going to try and cover it all here. So sit back, hit that follow button, and let's dive in. Some wild experience. I know now I got to rethink all my books on the mental health stuff because I got a pseudo professional here.
Oh, we're good. So I will say, you didn't specifically ask this, but I would say as a therapist, I see mental health representation in the media, and like I forced myself to watch 13 Reasons Why, and
Yes.
knowing that it was going to be terrible, and there's just so much in it that made me so angry. So, and I didn't mention this, I work with kids, so I work at a partial program for teenagers. Hi.
I was moving. I'm in the middle of recording a podcast here.
Because he's saying, he's talking a bunch of shit to me.
Okay.
Because he basically knows everything I've been doing for the last few weeks.
We talked about it. Like I said, I'm in the middle of something. I can talk to you when I'm done with this, no problem. But we chatted about what's been going on since we bounced, just generically.
So you told him that Clay was at my house?
I told him I've seen Clay, and I'll talk to him.
He said that Clay's at his house and blah, 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 blah.
He asked if Clay was at his apartment, and I answered truthfully. I said, yeah, we all went and quickly got the stuff.
But that's not the way he's saying that.
Oh, sorry, hold on just a second.
Sure.
All right, we're gonna have to kind of start over and I'll splice this. Sorry.
No worries.
Gosh, love it when you tell people you're doing something and they keep going.
Oh no.
Oh, all right, so I'm just gonna count down and we'll start over. So,
okay.
All right, so 3, 2, 1. All right, everybody, welcome back to Real Talkin' Fiction. This is your host, Eddie, and today I have the honor and pleasure of having a fellow author on with me. I'd like to introduce you guys all to KJ Pritchett. And really, I'm just going to hand the mic over to her and let her introduce herself. Tell us about yourself, like what it was that you do, who you are, your books, and what it is that got you kind of into writing.
Hello. Like Eddie said, my name is KJ Pritchett. In my day job, I am a licensed clinical social worker. I've been in the field about 10 years and working specifically with children and adolescents for the past 6. I think I don't really remember when I started writing. Like I know elementary, middle school for sure. My writing though has gone in a different direction. Like I always wanted to write fantasy because I remember the first author I really got into was Tamora Pierce, who wrote a lot of like young adult fantasy with female protagonists. But it was kind of funny as I, got into more like, I'm sorry, my brain is a little frazzled.
Mine doesn't too. So.
But as I went through, like I do also like went to college, kind of put writing on hold during that time because there's a lot of stuff going on.
Right.
And then I know I picked up writing again after I got my master's degree in social work, and writing definitely took a definite turn towards the more mental health aspect since I've been, like I said, in mental health for a very long time. I would say I do, even though I write like fantasy books, I do include a lot of mental health representation, in large part because there's so much terrible mental health representation. I know we had been talking earlier about, like, a couple years ago, I forced myself to watch 13 Reasons Why, and just
Right.
like, oh my God, it's so bad. So I try in my books to actually give a good representation of what people go through on a daily basis.
Right.
A lot of my characters struggle with more like anxiety and trauma. I do have a character who is very ADHD coded. Love her. She's absolutely all over the place. It's really funny when people say, like, oh my God, like, Anala, so like you did such a good job with like portraying ADHD. And I'm like, I am in a group room with teenagers for 6 hours a day, and 90% of them have ADHD.
Oh, jeez. That's
um,
got to be entertaining.
it's today in particular, I was like, what are we doing? This is a lot, but it's love my job. But especially I think for teenagers to have access to good mental health representation that isn't just that portrays it as, hey, this is something that people go through, and it's not like glamorized, I would
Right.
say, because I feel
Right.
like 13 Reasons Why was very like, showing things that didn't need to be shown, and just not giving, not just very not realistic, in my opinion.
Gotcha. No, I see where you're coming from. I'm not a professional in that area. My mom was a psychiatrist, but so I get all my mental health help and information off, social media. It's very glamorized and glorified, I think, to an extent, and probably even within my books that I've written, because like I take my personal thoughts and feelings and I wrap them into, the character, or, I take prior emotions and things like that, situations, and I put those into my books. It's very cathartic for me to do that. So I love that. I sounded smart using big words.
Catharsis, yes.
All right. Ask me what it means. I don't know. I just know where it goes.
Just getting it out,
Right. Yeah. So, but you said like you'd kind of been writing for a long time, elementary school, high school. When did you do your start writing your first book?
So first version, probably high school.
Okay.
So my first book, which now is a real book,
Nice.
Heir of Swansgrove. I think I probably wrote the first book in high school, and then I went to college. I studied political science and Spanish, and then I finished, and I'm like, got my degree. We can go back to writing because I can write for fun again. And
Right.
Looking at the quality of the writing, it was wild to see, like, wow, now I have a college degree. This like high school fiction is not cutting it. So I ended up rewriting it, and then changed a lot of elements after I got my master's degree, and then began to really see a lot more things through a mental health lens.
Awesome. Very nice. Yeah, I've my first two books, I've rewritten one of them because yeah, it was very much. I've only been writing for about 15, 16 years now. So very amateur, So, but with your books seem to, incorporate elements, of your learning and whatnot. And you said at one point that you're from PA. I'm from PA too, but do you base them in PA, or are they, because they are young adult fantasy, are they more made up worlds that you just?
So this series actually does take place in Pennsylvania.
Okay.
It's a made up town, but so I'm from Schuylkill County, which is this like tiny little, the only thing that's there is Yingling Brewery. And I mean, that's not like saying a whole lot. No,
that's not bragging.
Any Yingling fans, but great attraction. It is not. But it was loosely based off of the town. And so our high school, again, Pottsville's I'm from Pottsville, don't live there anymore, but our high school was called like the Castle on the Hill because it's this like very tall like brick building. And I know my descriptions of the school in my book, it's like, oh, it's very similar. So a lot of
All right.
my high school experiences, at least topography wise, definitely were influenced by Pennsylvania.
Gotcha. Yeah, I was 7 when I left, so there's no
Right.
PA involvement in any of my books.
Right.
So, um, so like your writing style. You had shot me an email, and I think in there you had said something about your writing style is very direct,
Mhm.
yet descriptive.
Mhm.
With a lot of like engaging dialogue. How do you balance when you're writing? How have you been balancing that description with the pacing in your books?
Um, that's a good question. It kind of just comes into a flow. Like there is a lot of dialogue in my books, which I feel keep the story moving. And
Hmm.
then I do have, it was actually very interesting because I tend to think my strength is more in writing dialogue.
Hmm.
When you work with teenagers, teenage dialogue like comes secondhand at this point because it's just I hear it all day, in a good way. Uh,
Uh-huh.
but it was funny because I was recently asked to come to a book club meeting actually in Pottsville.
Hmm.
They had picked my book to read in February. And when I was there, they had told me like, oh, your descriptions are, you can see exactly what's happening. And it was funny because I feel like sometimes as writers, we're so in our own stuff that sometimes other people see things that we don't.
Gotcha. Yeah. Yeah. No, I would agree with that. So, do you have any like favorite scene or like a favorite movie or
Moment.
there I go with my MS moment. Thank you.
Mhm.
From your books that really captures your style,
Mhm. Style or more like themes?
more style
More
or
style.
themes. Go ahead, answer both.
I would say there's a scene in my first book that pops up for me where the one character who struggles more with like trauma,
Mhm.
um, some bad stuff just happened, not what gave him trauma, but um, and he's struggling and he very much is the type of like don't touch me. I don't, as a lot of individuals who have trauma and anxiety do. And it's a learning moment for my main character, Acacia, because she's very like, I will hug you and make everything better. But it's this learning moment where she's trying to hug him and he's like, I don't want your pity hugs. And it just is like, but as the series goes on,
Mhm.
there's in the second book, kind of similar stuff is happening where this particular character is struggling, but she kind of like she has this moment of growth where she goes and talks to her dad, who is a psychologist, and is like, hey, how do I help someone? Like, how can I help this friend when I don't know what they want? And like, I want to go in and fix everything, but I can't do that. And it's, as I try to portray like good psychologists and therapists and all of that, the dad is like, hey, you're doing everything you can when when they're ready to talk to you, they will talk to you. So it's that like, and I try to show a lot of growth through the books because in the first book these characters are 14 years old, like their frontal lobe is not developed. It's still not developed in book 3, however
Yeah.
it's a bit more,
I'm
so it's kind of
46. Mine's not developed.
but it's kind of one of those like, hey, we make mistakes, we can show growth. This my third book is not out yet, but I just finished writing it, but there's a lot of I touch on a lot of like redemption archetype things of
Okay.
characters who have done kind of not the greatest things, but in one character's case it was kind of a planned out, I want to do certain things and I can't have people going after my family if I do that. And the other reason is like this character just has like so much trauma that none of the main characters know about. So it's kind of like that. But this character goes through like, hey, I know I did bad things, but I
Mhm.
want to no longer make those like decisions. Um,
Gotcha. That makes sense. That's my
Right.
life.
Right.
That sounds, that's, very realistic, and I like how you're making it a young adult book. Is that correct? That series?
It's young adult, yeah.
Yeah. So that's great. As a father, I've got a 24-year-old. He reads political, the Constitution,
Right.
history.
As he
Whereas
should.
yes, exactly. Thank you. My daughter, she's 22. She's more into, I don't know, more like the Twilight type, young adult books. So I'll have to tell her about yours. And then my 8-year-old, he's more about books about farts. Just being honest. 8-year-old boy, pick your nose,
Right.
scratch your butt.
Right.
So, he actually, it's funny because I talked to him a lot about what I'm writing, and he came up with a book idea, and he told me, "Dad, you need to stop writing so many scary books." I was like, "Okay, let's change it up. What you got, kid?"
Right.
So, but anyway, enough about me. This is about you. So, let's see here. I lost my place too. Like I said, I'm gonna look off the screen because I got my questions. Try to keep me on track here. Okay, yeah. So you had mentioned earlier in a conversation that poli-sci, right?
I have a political science degree, yeah.
That's okay. Yeah. So now I feel real amateur with writing because I got no
Oh,
degree.
no.
Your books do deal with, from what I understand, themes like political corruption, mental health, critical thinking, I guess would be safe. Why are those themes like important to you? And why, do you approach writing about mental health in the way that you do?
So I will say this will come around. But I had a political theory professor in college who was very instrumental in helping me to think more critically. Like we read like Socrates, The Apology, which like absolutely changed my life. I like read The Apology and made the gadfly my entire personality. Jokingly, not I mean, it's probably 75%, but at that point I kind of realized how important those critical thinking skills are. And unfortunately, depending where you live and depending on like what school you go to and all of that, I don't feel like kids always get that in school.
Right.
And it's
Right.
kind of like, hey, here's what you need to regurgitate for the PSSAs, or well, Pennsylvania, the PS, whatever the standardized testing is.
Yeah.
So I really wanted to, in writing these books, obviously the fantasy, like I'm like a huge fantasy nerd, but at the same time, like encouraging kids to ask questions, or who's ever reading these books, because we can't always trust what people in power are telling us.
Nope.
And not to get overly political, but it's one of those things like, hey, just because you see it on, this person said this, that does not mean that it's true.
Right.
Or there's a grain of truth in it, but there's all this other stuff that we don't know about. So one of the families in the series, I don't want to say they're political dissidents exactly, but they're very critical of the government from the beginning. And it kind of, in the first book, there's not a whole lot on the politics because it's more, here's the world and how the magic works and all of that. But the second book comes out with a lot of like, here's all the terrible stuff that happened that was, technically legal. And so I do try to incorporate that, like, hey, we do need to think critically because we can't always trust the people in power to be giving us the information we need to make informed decisions.
Yeah. Just turn to social media. It's all accurate on there, right?
Right. Everything, it's on the internet. It must be true.
Must be true. Yeah. So like as a writer, do you find that storytelling is any type of like for me it is a therapeutic outlet or anything like that?
Oh, definitely. I wouldn't say there's a character that's like a stand-in for me, but there definitely is like different parts of me in a lot of my characters. Not the villain, of course, I could never, but
Maybe that's my next project. I'm
oh,
the villain.
But it is therapeutic. And I will say, I mentioned this in an earlier conversation, but like not, I won't get into like the political aspect of it, but just like in the United States, there's a lot of business happening right now. And it the book that I just finished is not, the events are not based on events that are currently happening in the United States, but it was kind of, I know I've had like several moments where, oh my God, people are gonna think it's just because this happened. And it's not. It was always supposed to be like this. But
You're telling the future in your books is what you're telling me.
right, like who psychic. But it definitely is there, even though it was always planned, it was definitely very therapeutic to kind of get some of that stuff out there to like, okay, you know, these are, but a lot of it are things that I do think it is helpful for people, especially kids, to know about,
Right.
if that makes sense.
No, that does. It's funny you'd mentioned like Socrates earlier. My oldest son, I want to like, he has a book that is just thick as thick can be, and it is every single writing by Socrates,
Oh, that's awesome.
Plato, and was it Aristotle, something like that. And he has read that thing like 3 times back
Oh,
to
that's
back.
awesome.
He loves like old, philosophical type books and whatnot.
It was hilarious. I don't know if you're familiar with Lysistrata.
Yes.
That was one of it. My goodness, thinking back to my first political theory class, that was the first book we had to read, which was all, yeah. And I'm in class like, oh my God, what is happening?
Right.
Because it's a lot, but it's
Yes.
really it's fascinating. But
it is.
I mean, I love that like old stuff. Even I know in that particular class we read Lysistrata, the Apology. I know we read, I think I don't know if we read John Locke in that one, but I know we did read Jean-Jacques Rousseau, who, fun factoid about Katie, my first car I named Jean-Jacques for Jean-Jacques Rousseau because I am, yes, that big of a nerd. But a lot of that stuff, again, which is that critical thinking, like, hey, like, or I was just for some reason thinking about the Origin on Inequality by Rousseau earlier today. And it's one of those things that it's like, hey, we can't necessarily change this, but sometimes it is helpful to conceptualize why things are the way they are, even if the way they are isn't necessarily helping everyone.
Gotcha. Yeah. No, I love that. Like I said, I mean, I typically stick with like horror books, psychological thrillers. That's more my vibe. But it is strange at my age having my 24-year-old mailing me a book that he's like just head over heels excited about, and it's some old philosophical history book of sorts.
Right.
It's wild. I love it. So, but what would you say is probably one of your biggest challenges when it comes to writing? Like, is it the world building, the character development, or is it something else for you?
I would say so. Up until this point, I've been like a huge pantster. Like I just sit down to write, and whatever happens just kind of happens.
Right.
But that with this particular series, it becomes a lot more complicated because there is like there's like this governmental stuff happening with government corruption, and then so there's a people, I would say, in the book series. They're called woodsfolk. The idea of them is loosely based off like some of the druidic type stuff.
Okay.
There's more information about them. So it's like it would have been way, so sometimes keeping all those plot threads and making sure that, hey, it still makes sense. It like, so I know I had a like not a conversation with myself, but I'm like, hey, I'm gonna have to move this scene because I don't want it to be like this huge thing happens and then we're just on a different, like in a different part of the world. Because that, I know for me, that would be very jarring. But I actually did outline this book at least like 80%. And I was so proud of myself because was able to write this like very thick book, which hopefully I'll be able to cut down quite a bit, but in like 2.5 months. But I definitely think the outlining helped with that because I wasn't like, oh, well, what's going to happen next? What's going to happen next? Because it's like, we need to stay on our schedule.
Right. Yeah, I've run into that here probably this year. I've started working, or probably about the past year, I've started actually doing outlines. Whether I stick to it or not, I'm not going to comment on that. But yeah, I used to, before it was just idea, type, and let the story tell itself to me as I type it. Let the characters grow as I try to type them growing. So I found that very helpful once I started switching over to the outlines and creating the like a character page, like I'm a dungeon master playing D&D or something, trying to put their traits and everything in there. So, but for you, what has your experience been like? You're indie author or you're full on published?
I'm self-published, so
Okay. Me too. High five.
yeah.
So, but what's your experience been, like as an indie author, what do you really love about it, and what would you say for you is kind of the hardest part of being self-published indie author?
I think it's kind of two sides of the same coin. So on one side, it's having full control over
Mhm.
the book. Like I feel that my book that I just finished is too long, but a lot of that goes into like, hey, I do have a professional editor that I work with,
Mhm.
because I do want to put a good product out there. But it's also like, hey, that's money that like I have to pay for that person to do the work. At the same time, I don't know, not that my work is that like dissident, but I don't know, especially with the climate that we're in now, I don't know that there's just certain, I like to be able to put in there what I want to put in there and not have to deal with like, oh, maybe you shouldn't say the government's corrupt. And I don't, again, I don't know, and I don't want to get like overly political, but it's that aspect of I do spend a lot of time thinking like, is this something, because I do write for teenagers and, really, I would like to say I write for teenagers who do experience like mental health issues and like deal with like bullying and things like that, that I
Right.
don't, I'm very mindful of not putting things in that are overly triggering. Like there's obviously going to be like violence and
Mhm.
stuff like that because it's fantasy, but at the same time, it's like, okay, so we may have to like tone some things down because of the audience that I'm writing for.
True. I get
Uh,
what you're saying. Yeah.
I kind of went off.
Right.
Sorry.
The more you talk about the book, it's definitely something that, yeah, I might actually like. I'll have to check it out.
No,
Um,
I know there was a scene. So there is a scene in the second book. So that's this one, The Reluctant Lord. So oh, it's backwards, but there's a scene that I wrote it and then I went back and I, because the one character is it, okay, not too much spoilers, but the one character is triggered, like goes into like like a trauma response.
mhm.
And I wrote it and then kind of was like, okay, I need to tone this down a little bit because I can't take it out because it's important to the plot,
Mhm.
but I also don't want it to be like traumatizing for someone to read, if that makes sense.
Right.
So it's
Send
one
the
of
readers
those,
into the hospital.
yeah, no, we're not trying to have
Let's do
any
that.
inpatient admissions.
Right.
I've worked inpatient. It's a very needed service, but it's
Right.
not, I always think like, hey, if you cannot go inpatient and be safe, that's better.
That's
So
better. Yes.
I try
Yes.
to, again, not that I don't include those elements, but I try to be very mindful of how
Right.
I present them.
Yeah, you're doing it intelligently and kind of, for lack of a better phrase, if I'm hearing it right, you're doing it safe for the reader. So,
Yeah.
and I think that's great. I might not be doing that. I had someone read one of my books,
Mm.
and like chapter one
Mm.
shot her anxiety through the roof. I was like, oh no, my
Right. I
bad.
mean, horror is very different though. I feel like you kind of, not that you know what you're getting into. You know what I mean? I think that brings us into a whole conversation about like content warnings because
Mhm.
it's one of those things like, hey, you can write about, well, almost anything. I know there was some drama in book worlds last
Yes.
week, but you can write about whatever, almost whatever you want to. But I feel like it is. I mean, and I grew up. I'm a person. I don't really need content warnings. Like I said, I've been in mental health for 10 years. Not that I've seen everything, but I've heard a lot of things.
Right.
But I also think it's like, hey, you want to know what you're getting into. Like I
Right.
know there's some, when there's, we'll just say like we'll say violence. When there's violence in a book, if you're not in a place to be able to cope with that, it's like, hey, I just could not read that book.
Right. I just, bad on me. I'm like, okay, I write borderline horror, psychological thrillers. There's your trigger warning. It's psychological. It's scary. There's paranormal activity. So I should probably do a little better about that. So, but let's see. I just lost my place again. So, you said that you've written 2 out of 3 of your books. 2 of them are up for sale.
2 are published. I have the 2 in my young adult fantasy series are published. The 3rd is written but not edited. So I go through, I would say, extensive self edits before I work with my editor, just so I can get it in as good shape as possible. But I've also written 2 other books in separate universes, because last year I wrote the first in what I would say is the upper young adult fantasy, like epic fantasy, which also has a lot of mental health stuff, which is like a dark academia, secret societies type thing, which is written, but I still have, there's still some work to do on editing and developmental stuff. And then over the summer, I had a random idea and wrote the medieval one, which is like a new adult epic fantasy in a medieval setting that I accidentally included one of the main characters having like a terrible trauma history, which is not on page, but just kind of like stuff that he's trying to get figured out. But it's like a blessing and a curse to have these many ideas, because it's like, oh, I have to finish this series and then I need to work on that one, and it's like, oh my god, I would rather have lots of ideas than none, though. So
true. At the beginning of this year, I challenged myself as self-published indie. I was like, I'm going to release 1 book every single month. Just because I had a bunch of old stories that I'd started, so I was like, I'm going to finish these. Ooh, I don't know if I sleep. So, but your books, they're big. That looks like a lot of pages. So mine are smaller, like very thin.
Oh yeah. I mean, these are hardcovers too, so they look.
Oh, mine's so small.
I mean, I feel like that's also the genre. Like, I write epic fantasy,
yes,
which is,
it's got to be beefier.
It's going to be a bit on the heftier side.
Yes.
Which I know was a challenge in my first book, because I'm like, well, the first one should not be super long, just because new author, I know even myself, like, unless something comes recommended to me and it's like 700 pages, I'm not going to read it, just because I might try it if I don't have to pay for it. But it's one of those, like, you don't want to get something and then like, oh my god, I don't like this. But like for the first one, hey, it's a little bit shorter, there's not as much heavy character development. It's more, hey, this is the world, these are the main characters, here's the bad stuff that's happening, because nothing bad ever happens in fantasy books, of course. And then kind of gets into that, okay, here's the climax and the action. The second one is a lot more like the reader gets to learn a lot more about the characters, and so there's a character I absolutely love him. He's so I will say, I'm into astrology, but I'm not super hardcore, but he's very much the quintessential Scorpio, like Prince of Darkness has arrived. Who I absolutely love him. But in the first book, he stresses the main character's name is Acacia. He stresses her out so hard, just flirts with her constantly. She walks in the room, you must be exhausted because you've been running through my mind all day, just to stress her out, like no other reason. But the reader gets to kind of learn in the second book, like, hey, like, where is this like facade? Like, why do we always wear this? What's going on? Which I really enjoyed, because like I said, I absolutely love this character.
That's awesome. I love it. No, that's great. Even the cheesy, you've been running through my mind all day.
Yeah, he's terrible.
Oh,
Like, I know I had sent a friend a quote from book three, but like with no context, and it was like somebody was like, we have to have direction, and he's just like he does the hair flip, and he's just like, bold of you to think my life has direction. And I'm like, I feel that on a spiritual level.
right. I love it. Like, and from the sounds of it, you do too. But like when you're writing, you connect with the character that you're writing so much. I
And
love
I do
that.
write in different point of views. Like I would say at least 70% of the books, this is not calculated, this is just me thinking. The vast majority, I would say maybe 60-70% of the book is through Acacia's point of view, but I prefer reading books where there's different. Not that it's bad if it is always in one person's point of view, but I like being able to go into other people's heads, and it's very interesting because I love writing Acacia's point of view. Sometimes I get sick of being in there. So, I mean, there's reasons why I switch point of view as well, but I know another one of my characters who's like the thoughtful, analytic, but yet very anxious
Mhm.
characters. Like I can write his point of views like so easily. It's ridiculous because it's
Right.
just like I'm in there. Uh,
Yeah.
I'm in there for all of them, but it's just
Yeah.
interesting how certain point of views are easier to write than others.
Very true. Yeah. No, I like to get out of my head too. It's too dark sometimes. So, but now you had also, I can't remember if it was something we had talked about earlier or you had emailed me about it, but you've done book signings
I've done one book signing
or
and I
just one?
attended one book club.
Okay. Okay. I think
It's
that
kind
might
of
have been
turned
where I
into a
missed it.
signing, but
So, like with your book signing, was it like a virtual thing? That's how I do mine. Because again, yes, I am on TikTok.
right.
So, I have people, they buy a book, they can pay a little extra. I'll sign it, make a video, blah, blah, blah. Were you at an actual like bookstore or
Yes.
oh, okay.
So
How was
they're
that?
in so I live outside of Harrisburg, Pennsylvania.
Mm-hmm.
In excuse me, I believe it's Enola. There is a indie bookstore called Cupboard Maker Books.
Okay.
They're amazing. They have cats. And they work with they work with, so they have 3 cats that live there.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you walk up to the door, it's like, don't let the cats out, no matter what they say. And it's like,
No matter.
it was just so funny. But they also work with a local cat shelter to like get cats adopted.
Mm-hmm.
But they do book signings with local authors. And I don't know exactly how I got connected with them. I think I just did like I was looking for opportunities to kind of like get out there and get my book out there.
Mm-hmm.
And so I know I like submitted a form, attended this like class that they do to kind of prep you on like the do's and don'ts, because I know the big thing that they said was like, do not mention Amazon.
Oh,
Um, just not for political reasons, but just like Amazon is a big competitor for local
right.
bookstores because it's a
Right.
lot easier for Amazon to cover costs of
Oh,
shipping
yeah.
and all of that. So it was like,
Right.
don't mention Amazon, talk to people, don't be on your phone, that kind of thing. But then this October was when my book signing was,
Oh,
which was fun. It was definitely a good experience. People really were there for the cats, but you know,
your books were just a bonus, right?
yeah, it's like, hey, books and also cats. But honestly,
Hey,
books and cats are
win-win.
probably 2 of my favorite things. So,
Nice. Nice. I like it. So on here, if you want to, you can mention Amazon. Where
right.
can people find and purchase your books for anybody who's listening to this?
So they are available. So I go through Ingram Spark,
Okay.
which they I can't think of the right word right now. They make books available on a lot of retailers, so it
Right.
is available on Amazon. Um, I know when I order books, I try to go through Barnes and Noble myself, just because reasons. But they are available Amazon, Barnes and Noble. I know Books a Million. I think Thrift Books too. If you Google The Heir of Swansgrove or The Reluctant Lord, or if you Google my name, KJ Pritchett, it will, I mean, I'm sure Amazon is the first one that shows up, but they're available on a couple different outlets if individuals are interested in it, but don't want to shop at Amazon.
Right. Yeah. Ingram Spark. I know they do a, when you sign up with them to help publish your book, they do a distribution to a lot of online retailers. When I first started, I used Lulu. Are you familiar with them? Yeah.
I am not.
Oh, they're similar. Quality is not as similar.
Right.
Lots of misprints, but still good. But they distributed like all over the place. I was finding my first book on sites I had never heard of.
Right.
It was wild. So, but for me, I use KDP, Amazon, and I know they distribute to Barnes and Noble as well, and a few other sites. So, you know, and do you have a your own personal business website or?
I do.
Okay.
What is I'm just gonna I believe it's kdjpritchett.com. I'm just verifying that. Because I forget things. Yes, it is kdjpritchett.com is my website. It is on my Instagram page, if that's easier for folks to navigate.
Okay. And where can people, social media wise, where can they find you? Like what's, if you don't mind, usernames, things like direct some potential fans to you.
Again, just checking. So I am KJ Pritchett Writes on Instagram and Threads, which I would say are my two main platforms. Sadly, my first TikTok account also was banned. I have no idea why. It was super frustrating because I cracked like my first 1,000 and then was like, all right, yes. And then just banned for no reason, which I was like, what? Like I write YA at this point. There is nothing spicy on there. There's nothing inappropriate, but whatever, So I am not on TikTok currently. They stressed me out with all of the nonsense that went down in January. And exactly. But I am on Tumblr too. Also, KJ Pritchett Writes on Tumblr.
Okay.
That's my main ones. I would say if anyone who is listening is interested in my work, books, whatever, we authors do not have control over social media, and we do. Instagram tried to ban me too. Again, I feel like it's just the logarithm that just there was an update and it was like, oh, we're just doing weird stuff. The best way to keep up to date is through my newsletter, which if you go to my website and go to contact, or it's also on the landing page, like the front page, you can sign up for my newsletter. I do send an email out about once a month, unless there's a lot of stuff happening, then it might be more than that. I do my own character art as well. So a lot of times I try to include a picture that I haven't posted on social media on my newsletter as like a special, like, hey, you guys get to see it first.
Very cool. And I'll put like everything, your website, your social media, I'm going to put that into the description, as well as, like I was telling you, I take all of my interviews, put them all onto YouTube. So I'll put that information in there as well. So anybody listening, they'll be able to click in there. So I might have to reach back out to you to find your information again.
Hopefully it won't take me like another 2 weeks to resolve.
People are busy. Everything's busy. So I've got a couple other questions maybe, but one, if you could, like have dinner with any author that you know of, current, past, dead, who would it be and why would you want to sit down and have a dinner with them?
Honestly, I think Tamora Pierce, because I was into, like, as like a middle schooler, I was into the Harry Potter books, but I really try to distance myself because I don't agree with a lot of the stuff that J.K. Rowling says, which is funny because a lot of people who've read my books are like, it's very similar. I struggle because the story is completely different, but like the magic components and like not to sound like cliche, but like the power of friendship and that kind of stuff is very much a theme. But I'm like, I don't, you know what I mean? I try to avoid those comparisons because, things.
Yeah.
But it would
Yeah.
definitely be, I think, Tamora Pierce, who I think also is from Pennsylvania, which is kind of
Oh,
wild.
wow. Wow.
Her books were honestly, I think, really what got me into reading and writing. Because, like, as a girl in the early 2000s, I guess I would say, a lot of the books out were like boy main characters. And I read plenty of those books too, because I don't really care. But I know the first book that I read by her was the first in a quartet, which initially I wanted to write in quartets, but this series might end up being a bit longer. But like they were medieval, but in the first book that I read of hers was about a girl who basically, she is a twin, and she wants to be a knight, her brother wants to be a sorcerer, and the father is like, yeah, no, you're going to finishing school and he's going to be a knight. So they swap places.
Okay.
So because they teach the sorcerers at the same place where the girls go to learn how to like get a husband, basically.
Okay.
But they, like, she cut her hair and they swapped places.
Hmm.
And it goes through all this because that was not legal, like in Tortle, which was the kingdom. And it goes through like, and she was such a baddie. And I love Alana, who was the name of the character. And I definitely do, not that Acacia is based off her, but I don't think she would be the same person if not for Alana.
Okay.
So like I genuinely look up to her as a person. Like, even though her stuff was medieval, towards the ends, or in a couple of the book series, she did really touch on like even LGBTQ stuff.
Oh, wow.
Which is like wild. And I mean, again, her books, these are not like new books. These were, I believe the Alana series was actually like, I think the first one was published maybe in like 1990 or like 80.
Okay.
So it was very, in my opinion, kind of progressive for that time. Not that we were in like the Stone Age in the early 2000s, but
Right. No, but still, like the themes weren't as prevalent and there like they
like
are
there weren't
thus
as
far
many
these
girl
days.
books, which
Right.
then I would say in the 2010s there was a lot more with like the Hunger Games. Not that the Hunger Games is a girl book, but
No, but the main protagonist there, and that was one thing for me. Like, a lot of my characters are males, and I wrote it was small. It is nowhere near the size of your book. I think all three of my books equal your part one.
oh no, no
it
worries.
was it was just fun.
Yeah.
Doing a dark fantasy trilogy. It was just a little experiment for me to push myself, and I was like, okay, I'm going to try and write a strong female protagonist. And I will tell you what, as a dude, that was difficult for me. I mean, I'm not a classically trained author or poet or anything. I just go off my imagination and what I'm seeing or dealing with, and I write. And like I said, that was a lot of fun trying to think from that lady's perspective. And thinking of stronger women that I know, like my mom, or so and so, just trying to put that power as a male into a female character. I found it difficult, but a lot of fun. And
you
I really,
also don't want to be like the stereotypical like male fantasy authors that a lot of people are like, oh, like we're all walking around naked staring at our boobs, like that is not my main concern.
no,
So it is one of
there's
those
none of
like,
that.
yeah. I'm not
There's
saying that that's what you do at all. Just like,
no,
it's good
no,
to be mindful of those things.
right. And it's funny because a lot of my friends and followers, they're like, well, you should write spicy romance. I'm like, no, thanks.
Right.
I write about love in a lot of my books, but more that, yes, it's still relational love, but I'm not going spicy with it. I'm not trying to write 52 Shades of Grey.
No, and I mean, I think it depends on the book. Like, I mean, young adult, they not spicy because that's inappropriate.
Yes.
That is a hill that I will die on. Because I try not to argue things online because it's like, hey, that's not good for my like who I am as an author. But that's one that I'm like,
No.
nope. Not that it can't be present, but just like it shouldn't be open door.
Right.
But even like even though, so they're fantasy, there are relationships, there's romantic subplots, but even in my like new adult, I don't see that being like an open door, because that's not my forte. I'd
Right.
rather the battles and there's also a lot of ways to, and I have no issues with spicy books. I read them sometimes. Probably not my main genre that I read, but every once in a while, like whatever. But I think it's one of those things, like you can also show romance in very different ways. Like in my second book, the character who struggles with like the physical touch and like the anxiety and trauma and stuff, there's a scene between him and his love interest, who is this ADHD dragon speaker who's like absolutely all over the place, and she like accidentally triggers him, and it's this conversation of like, hey, like I want you to feel safe with me. I don't want to be like the thing that triggers you. I want to be that like that safe person. And it's like you can tell it's I mean, not to toot my own horn, but I absolutely love that scene, because it just shows like, even though she is all over the place, like, and she is all over the place, like, is there a dragon? She's there talking to it, all that stuff.
Nice.
But it's like, hey, you can be that person and still be like, hey, I love and care about you. How can I be the person that you need me to be to support you, kind of thing.
Right. No, I get that. And like I was saying earlier, I do a lot of, as a single father, or a father who's single, however you want to look at it, and go through like family court issues, custody issues. I think my first ex-wife and I, we were in a custody issue for 7 years. So I do incorporate those types of things into my books as well. But I also don't do it from the stereotypical like Andrew Tate woman bashing, because I understand the kids need both mom and dad, to become a well-rounded, human being or citizen of America. They need the love and the care. They need both aspects. And so, when I'm writing about that, similar to like what you're saying about romance, I do my best to not, unless of course I'm making the ex-husband or the ex-wife a complete a-hole. I do my best not to cross those types of lines, and do it in a respectful way that still draws the emotional energy for the reader, so that they can feel that quote unquote pain of the one parent, but not to systemically be sexist towards another character in my own book. I'm not that way in real life, so why do that in my books? Right. So
exactly.
I'm just saying, I don't mind who you love, what you love. That's you. I know what I like. You know what you like. Good. Right. I'm happy for you. Right. So, let's see. There was another one. I'm trying to find it real quick. I love the more like personal, just what if type questions sometimes. So, actually, this one might be good because your books are fantasy. So I'm assuming you don't do like fantasy with like AI and technology mixed into it, right?
It's modern day. There's technology in that, like the kids have cell phones, but there's not really besides that.
Okay. So if your main character had access to say like modern day technology, Google, AI, all that stuff, what's the first app you think that they would download? Really has nothing to do with writing books, but
honestly, I feel like Acacia would just like go and look and find memes and just, because like I actually referenced that it was actually through, so her love interest, his name is Alex. So there's a scene where she went and was doing some stuff and then came back, and then he's like reflecting on like, oh, like it's been, because so she moves to the town of Silent Springs, which is not a real town in Pennsylvania, in the beginning of the first book. And by the end of that book, they're in a relationship. And so they, at this point in the third book, they've been together for like over 2 years and haven't really been separated for like that time. And like and like I said, she was doing some stuff, comes back, and he's just like, oh, like haven't even gotten like a text from her or like a goofy meme that she found. Like I feel like she would be that person. Like
You
she could
just go to Google, constantly
yeah,
Googling
just be
memes.
like memes and like
That's
send like
awesome.
marked safe from, whatever. It would be
Whatever
like,
tragedy.
yeah, she's a
That's
troll
awesome.
though. Like I mean, even though like yes, there is like it's a modern-ish world, there's just not a whole like even texting, like do they text? Yes, but they can use like
Like
telepathy.
telepathy.
So it's like, why am I gonna text you if I can just but
That's
she's a
faster.
troll. She like gives people noogies like 24/7.
Nice.
And
I
I'm just
like
like,
it.
oh, what are you doing? Lovingly. She does it lovingly, but she gets on my nerves.
Just, jeez.
But I get
That's
on my nerves,
fantastic.
so
You do. All right. Well, I've taken up a lot of your time already. I want to give you another chance. Go ahead and tell anybody listening where they can find your stuff and anything else you want to talk about regarding your books. And for the people on YouTube, hold them up if you don't mind, so they can see
oh yeah.
your awesome covers.
So I have two books out. The Heir of Swansgrove, which has this is a staff, by the way. And we have The Reluctant Lord, which are books 1 and 2 in a young adult epic fantasy series. If you like any kind of magic, dragons, so far I have had one additional dragon for each book. So there's 1 and 1, 2 and 2. Who knows how many there will be by the end of the series. We got magic, we got dragons, found family. I have a group of teenagers in these books who become friends, but definitely become more than friends as the story goes on. Because as I posted on Instagram a couple days ago, like they will literally go to war for each other. Wink, 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 wink. Uh, and a chosen one who I feel is not overly annoying. I feel like sometimes that archetype can be kind of the chosen one. I feel like she handles it pretty well. But they are available ebook and paperback hardcovers. These are hardcovers, but there are paperbacks out there as well. They're available on most online retailers. So your Amazon, Barnes and Noble, probably Target. But if you do have an indie bookstore that you go to, you can always ask them to order it for you as well.
Yes, yes. Indie authors at indie bookstores. That's perfect. Go market for us.
Yes.
Well, I want to thank you for your time. I'm gonna grab links. I'm gonna put them in my descriptions. So if anybody listening or watching, wants to check the books out, that information is going to be there for them. So it was a pleasure speaking with you. I love the concept and the themes that you've told me about in your books. So once I get a little settled down, I might have to switch up genres I read. So maybe
Right.
get away from the horror, like my mother, huge Stephen King fan,
Right.
and whatnot. So I really do appreciate your time, though.
Oh, thank you for having me.
No
Feeling is
problem.
mutual.
Thank you. We'll stay in touch. And
Yep.
for everybody who's listened, thank you guys so much. And again, Katie, thank you again for your time today. And I wish you all the best. And I hope some more indie bookstores pick your books up and you do more book signings. Be better than J.K. Rowling, okay?
I mean, I did. That was a concern when I picked my pen name because I'm like, oh no, it's the same first two letters. But it's fine.
Yeah, you put your own flair into it. You'll squash her. So just don't get on X or Twitter like she does.
I deleted that like years ago. I couldn't do it. I had a really just bizarre experience where someone disagreed with something that I said, and this was not an author Twitter account. This was my personal life. Somebody did not like my opinion, and they scrolled through like over a year of posts to find a picture of me to say blah 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 blah. And I'm like, you wasted all of that time. Like, get a hobby, like read a book, go outside, like wood carving, like just like get off X.
Yeah, exactly. So
but if you're on X, thoughts and prayers. That's all I can say.
Right. Well, again, thank you very much. And it was such a pleasure speaking with you today. You have a great one, okay?
You too.
All right. Bye.
Bye.
That kind of wraps up this episode of Real Talkin' Fiction. If you enjoyed today's discussion, make sure to follow the podcast, please, so you never miss an episode. And if something resonated with you, share it. Share it with a friend. It helps me more than you guys know. If you'd like to support the show and my writing, you can always join me on Patreon. For honest, I'm thinking, I believe as little as $1 a month. Your support's going to help me keep creating, and in return, you guys are going to receive exclusive updates, behind the scenes content, as well as early access to some new projects. So, check it out. Just head on over to Patreon, search Edward. Search Bowers Inc. B as in boy, OWERSINK. And you should be able to find me there. Also, I think somewhere on this podcast, possibly on the YouTube channel, I've got the links shared there. And if you love a good thriller, don't forget to check out my books. They're available on Amazon. All right, just search Edward Bowers in the search bar, and it should pull up everything I've written and published. You can also find all the details at my website, which is edwardbowersofficial.com. It's kind of a basic website, but I'm working on it. Okay, bear with me. But thanks for tuning in, y'all. Just stay real. Keep turning the pages of your own story. And I'll see you guys next time, all right?